Welcome to The Blue Dot, Northern Kentucky's premier political podcast, brought to you by the Kenton County Democratic Executive Committee. Welcome back to The Blue Dot podcast. We're a little over 100 days from the midterm election, and we're ready to flip some seats. Today, we'll be talking to Zach Dembo, the candidate who is looking to flip Kentucky's 6th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Natalie McDonald.
And I'm Brian Kale. Zach Dembo is a Kentucky attorney, former Navy Judge Advocate General, or JAG officer, former federal prosecutor, and public servant. He was raised in Lexington and is a ninth-generation Kentuckian with family roots in Shelby and Henry counties. He served more than 4 years on active duty in the United States Navy JAG Corps before joining the U.S. Department of Justice, where he worked as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division. He later served in Kentucky state government as a policy advisor and legislative director for Governor Andy Beshear. Afterward, he returned to federal service as an assistant United States attorney in Lexington.
Yeah, so Zach, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, Zach.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Brian. And thanks to all your members who listen. And I'm excited to talk with you all today.
Sounds good. And also thank you for your service to our country.
Yes, sir.
And all of that. I'm fascinated about your wide breadth of experience. As Brian mentioned, you've served in active duty, you've taught public schools, you rescue animals, worked in the Beshear administration as a policy advisor. So I'm not sure if there's anything that you can't do. But I'll hand it over to you. Tell us a little bit more about you and what inspired you to run for this seat.
Well, thanks for the very warm introduction. There are lots of things I can't do. And, when you lift off that resume, you look, really, I just can't hold a job, just keep going from job to job. And actually, that's kind of why I ran for this seat because, as you highlighted, I was lucky to have longstanding Kentucky roots and grow up in this district in Lexington, my hometown. My mom was the first in our family to go to college. She grew up on a farm, as you mentioned, Brian, in rural Shelby County. She went to UK and she met my dad along the way, a guy from New York that she convinced to move down here. And he taught at UK his whole career. So I was just really lucky to have a family that valued education. But as a result, because I knew plenty of people weren't so lucky and plenty of people didn't have the opportunity to go to college that I did, I spent the whole rest of my career trying to pay it forward. And so, as you said, I taught in a rural classroom for my first job out of college, was on active duty, was a federal prosecutor, worked for Governor Beshear, and then returned to being a federal prosecutor. And the only reason I left Governor Beshear's employ was because being a federal prosecutor in your hometown is kind of the dream job, because your only job is to do the right thing every day when it's done correctly. And so it was such an honor to serve the people of the Eastern District of Kentucky and fight for victims of crime and justice. But when this administration came in and they changed the mission of the department from prosecuting corruption to enabling corruption, and they changed it from serving the American people to serving just the president and being his personal law firm, that didn't square with my values. And that's certainly not the kind of service that I'd been giving in the federal government. My history was nonpartisan, mission-oriented work, not the sort of partisan politicization we're seeing. So I felt like I had to resign as a matter of conscience. It was a very, very difficult decision to walk away from 11 years of federal service and the job I loved. But ultimately, that was what my values dictated I need to do. So when I resigned, the question was, how do I keep fighting for people and serving people like I did for my students, for sailors and Marines, for victims of crime? And that's why I had the very strange and still somewhat bizarre idea to run for office. I'm not a very political person. My career is not political, but with Andy Barr following his own craven political ambition by running for Senate, it opens up this seat for the first time in 20 years. And while this wasn't the service I'd anticipated, I thought I could make a real difference. I think I can help people and fight for them. And I think I can really improve the sort of representation we're getting in DC. And so that's why I decided I would get in and run for office for the first time.
Well, those are some great reasons, and we really appreciate that. In fact, those are the reasons why, we should have people running and why we have a nearly full slate of Democrats running many filling slots and races that have never been filled before, because, what people are seeing is saying somebody's got to step up. It might as well be me. So thank you for doing that. And I could say also that your opponent doesn't necessarily have to be a politician. All he has to do is say whatever Donald Trump says and directs him to do. So, that should be pretty easy. But we might get to that later. Back to Kentucky and the consistent concerns from families that we're hearing about the rising costs of living, access to quality health care, educational opportunities. Are these the same issues, the primary issues you're hearing from your constituents? And what policy solutions do you believe could have the biggest impact to really help these working families succeed and thrive?
Yeah, Brian, it's not going to surprise you to know that when I'm on doors or doing events out there with anyone from young folks to folks who are retired living on a fixed income, the ability of folks to afford everyday life is what I'm hearing. It's about the costs, and it's about the fact that the rampant inflation and tariffs and this war in Iran and everything are eating up any gains we're making in wages. And meanwhile, people are worried about not just how to afford housing or their car payment or their student loan payment, but they're also worried about healthcare and these Medicaid cuts. And we're hearing this across the country, but I really believe that we here in the 6th are being hurt by it especially hard. First, as you all know, these Medicaid cuts are a real danger to rural hospitals, and Kentucky has the greatest number of rural hospitals at risk, with 35 potentially closing as a result. 6 of those are right here in the district. And so in other maybe more affluent parts of the country, that may be an abstraction. Here, people know folks who rely on these hospitals for care, and they also know people who work there, because often these are the second biggest employers after schools in some of these counties.
Right.
And so there's a real impact they're seeing. And then, of course, there's in terms of the tariffs, people know folks in the bourbon industry, in the agriculture industry. They know people who work at the Toyota plant in Scott County, which is the biggest Toyota manufacturing plant in the world. They know people who are affected by this because all of those industries I've just mentioned have been hurt by these tariffs. And then all of us have had our own pocketbooks hurt because they've passed on about $1,000 in taxes to every American household. And now we've got this war in Iran that's made gas and diesel increasingly unaffordable, particularly for farmers. And it started off right when farming and planting season was kicking off for the year. In terms of solutions, the easiest way to put it is just Congress needs to do its job. So much of what this administration is doing is actually within Congress's power. You look at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress has the power to establish tariffs, and courts, time and again, have now told the administration that these tariffs are illegal, giving Congress the perfect opportunity to step up and fight for us. But unfortunately, what the founders never envisioned was that someone as spineless as Mike Johnson would just give up all of Congress's power to another branch of government and say, even though it is unconstitutional, we'll just let you handle tariffs. That's why we're all stuck with the bill while Congress isn't doing anything. Similarly, on these Medicaid cuts, we've got both them passing this One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is kicking people off of their health care while giving tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires, and also exploding the deficit and debt. And then at the same time, right, you have them not acting on the ACA subsidies and just having people's healthcare premiums double or triple. So all of this is nicely fixable because it's within Congress's power. They're just too cowardly or too political or too beholden to their party. I'm not sure why, to act on our behalf. And that's why, thankfully, it's an easy fix.
All of that, everything you said. I was at the grocery store where do you start? I was at the grocery store on the day before 4th of July and randomly ran into 2 separate groups of people when we were going through, the bins and stuff. And they were talking about like, I just can't afford this. And I was thinking, this is the 4th of July, right? How un-American is it that we can't buy hot dogs and hamburgers, and yet we have a president who's just made $2.5 billion or more off of the backs of the American people. And it's just, I don't know, it's just unfathomable. And I guess my question to you is, then how do we communicate this back to the people? We see the problem. We see the Democrats have solutions. We're trying to work on those solutions. There's this communication gap. It's getting through the noise, all the echo chambers that everybody's in. I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit about how do we break through?
No, look, you're not wrong. And, I've not been doing this work. So, on the one hand, what that means is it's easy for me to come in and say, oh, everyone's been doing it wrong. And so I don't mean to, Monday morning quarterback folks. But on the other hand, being new to this work means I don't owe anyone anything. And frankly, other than Governor Bashir, who I was lucky enough to work for, and obviously he and I see things the same way, I have no allegiance to anyone. So I don't mind saying there are huge failures that national Democrats have had for years, which resulted in Trump being reelected, which resulted in us feeling like there's this disconnect between the party's policies and how it's affecting everyday people. And so, for example, one thing that I think Governor Bashir does well that the National Party does not is making sure we are reaching out to, including, and caring about rural voters. The sixth is such a wonderful and unique district, but it's also the profile that Democrats have to be winning and can win. Governor Bashir carried this district by 20 points in his reelection. 20. That's more than Trump carried it by. It's decisive. And it just shows people will vote for a Democrat with the right message and the right outreach. But, we've had national Democrats, sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly, say they're not even going to try to connect with rural voters, that it's a waste of time. And I mean, first, from a moral perspective, trying to ask for people's votes and trying to represent them while writing them off based on the zip code they live in is offensive. And then the other thing is politically, obviously, that has not worked out well for the Democrats nationally. And so I think just the first thing you got to do when you're talking about how do we break down this disconnect is making sure we're showing up and making sure our messaging is, we want to represent everyone. We want to represent Republicans, independents, and Democrats. We want to represent rural, suburban, and urban areas. And most importantly, if you voted for Trump at any point, we're not going to shame you for that, which seemed to be part of our previous rhetoric, which never seemed to make sense to me. We're going to try to point out why Trump is betraying the trust that you've put in him and why we're actually the ones who have the solutions to fix the problems that cause you to vote for him in the first place. So, I think there's a lot to be discussed about this, and I feel very passionately about it because I'm excited about the future of the Democratic Party. If we can truly become a big tent party, when we take back the House, and we hopefully will be part of it here in the sixth, there's a huge opportunity, but also a lot of responsibility that comes with. And it's about fixing these problems and making sure the American people know we are fighting for them. We are standing up for everyone, whereas the Republicans only care about Trump. That's all they care about. We're all tired of him. Even some of his supporters are tired of him with all the hijinks he's been doing. We need to be looking to the future, and Democrats need to be presenting the solutions that are going to help people know we're on their side.
And I like what you said about the rural voters because we try to elevate rural voices on our podcast as well, and they want to be seen. The rural counties in Kentucky want to be seen. They've come on the podcast. Labor is reaching out to rural. I think that there's a real path to building bridges there. So I commend you for elevating that a little bit.
Yeah, I think one of the struggles with rural voters in some periods in the past is trying to, get your message out and help people see what's really going on is complex or maybe nuanced, but right now, there's not a whole lot of nuance. I mean, are prices higher, now than they were? Donald Trump say no more foreign wars and ran on that forever. And, we've been bombing how many countries and we're enmeshed in this, mess in Iran. And then the financial disclosure, as, Natalie mentioned earlier, the $2.x billion, 1.4 billion in crypto that Trump put in his pocket, while I think they're now up to 1 million investors now have lost it's billions of dollars, while a small handful of people, Trump and his buddies, made a killing on it. So that's not nuanced. That's pretty easy for people to see and to verify. So in some way, being able to get that message out should be, I don't want to say easy, but it should be pretty easy to strike up a conversation and have people be interested in it.
No, I completely agree, Brian. And, looking at this from a prosecutor's perspective,
Yeah.
You're limited by the evidence you have, and you can be the best prosecutor in the world. I really like the case we have for
Yeah.
all the reasons you
Right
point out.
on.
All the reasons you point out. And I mean, I hate that it's because that it means that people are suffering. But on the other hand,
Mhm.
the reason that we are so fervently against this administration and so fervently want to change is because people are suffering. And if they weren't, then hopefully we would all have the good sense. If there was a Republican idea that happened to help people, I haven't seen many in a long time, but if it happened to be the case, hopefully we would be big enough to say, you know what, we're in favor of
Right.
that too.
Right.
So you're exactly right that I think the evidence is very much there, and I think it's a very compelling case.
Yeah, and these Medicare cuts are coming, and and it's getting closer. I know there were two features on our local news up here about families who are going to lose healthcare for their disabled family members that I literally brought tears to my eyes. And then on the other side, we have these small family businesses, these farms. These farms are suffering, and the farmers are suffering due to the tariffs. So it just seems like everybody is being impacted by all of this. So again, just kind of going back to that, if we can just keep reaching out to them and messaging, I think that there's again building that divide is going to be huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah. And Natalie mentioned the small businesses and family farms and some of these industries, they've been hit the hardest under this administration. So, I mean, Zach, do you have ideas on what the government should do, policies or avoid doing, like out of the gate to help them succeed? And, we were talking about communicating. When talking to them, what kind of, policy reversals and what kind of ideas, would you have that you'd want to share?
No, and I'm so glad you guys are highlighting this because again, coming from a long line of farmers and my uncle and cousins still farm and that's I think that's a huge priority of ours. And the first thing is obviously it's such an important part of Kentucky's history, agriculture, and not just for my family, but for so many. And it's a big part of the economy here in central Kentucky, and we need to support it. And on the flip side, I think we really need to point out exactly as you said, Brian, this is an anti farmer, anti American industry administration and Congress. I don't know, you all may know that Kentucky raises the most beef cattle east of the Mississippi. So we've
I
got a
did
lot
not
of
know
beef
that.
farmers here, right? And they've had it really hard. It wasn't easy to begin with. Then these tariffs hurt them. And then the administration turns around and buys hundreds of billions of dollars of cheap Argentine beef as a complete
Right.
slap into the face
Yeah.
of these farmers, only because the president of Argentina and the president of the United States are buddies. That's the only reason I can tell why they're doing that. And so we need to be pointing that out and saying, look, if you support farmers, this is not the party for you. They're going to leave you behind. What Congress needs to be doing, first of all, is actually passing a farm bill. I'm glad to see there's been some movement on it. There are definitely some provisions of the farm bill I really don't like. There are others I'd be in favor of. But the simple fact of the matter is, we haven't had a fully fledged farm bill since 2018. I think that tells you this is not as much of a priority as it should be. And there are some Democrats who are doing some great leadership on this. But generally speaking, I think Democrats need to be repositioning, especially those of us running in places like Kentucky, to show we are the pro farmer party and to really lean in on this sort of policy that unfortunately has not been associated with our party for a while. But I think it should be. And I think, unfortunately, with how terrible this administration and Congress's policies are, gives us a huge opening to show that's not the way. We can do better.
Yeah. So on the good news is you have a plan. We need to flip these seats, and so the 6th Congressional District is definitely on the map for turning blue. We had a podcast with Andrew Grossman with Battleground Alliance, which is a labor-backed PAC, and they're pledging $50 million to focus on registration and turnout in 37 Republican-held districts, and yours is one of them. So what's your ground game look like? It sounds like, we had the plan, we had the messaging. Now we need the boots on the ground. So how's that looking for you?
Yeah. So it's really first and foremost about convincing people that we can win this because we really can. And so a lot of people, for example, look at the Trump number, are discouraged, and they don't know about Governor Bashir's amazing showing in the district. They don't know that registration wise, even though people call this a red district, it is darn near 50-50 Republicans and Democrats. They don't know. I don't know if you guys saw the Kentucky Lantern the other day, but they don't know that there are still some counties in the district, and not just Fayette, that actually have majority Democrats registered. So I think people think it's a lot harder than it actually is, and it's a lot more attainable. Now, it's an uphill battle. Don't get me wrong. We're going to need every single person rowing in the same direction, but it's really attainable. And that's been borne out by the polling. There was a poll that came out before the primary that showed me statistically tied with Ralph Alvarado, the Republican nominee. And then once they heard about our bios, I was up by 7. I'll tell you, I think there's going to be another poll that's going to come out soon that's also going to show a statistical tie. So the first thing we got to do is make sure that folks who have felt like they've been on their back foot for too long and think that this is hopeless know that there's hope. In terms of the ground game, look, there's no better model than Governor Beshear's strategy in 23. You know, he was able to win first and foremost by making sure that Fayette turnout was robust. We obviously have to have that as the largest county in the district. And I'm hopeful, both with the great partners we have in Fayette, the work we're doing, me being a native son of Fayette, that those will align. But we also need to make sure we're not just thinking about Fayette, because I can't tell you how often I get out of there and everyone says, you need to remember there are other counties. And as someone with roots in rural Kentucky, I'll never forget it. In the suburban districts, you know, Madison, Scott, those are ones we can absolutely win. Governor Beshear carried 9 of the 16 counties in this district. Those are the same ones I want to win. But the other thing I just want to make sure is, as we were talking about with rural voters, there are some that realistically, I don't think we will win outright. But the way Governor Beshear still had such a great showing was he lost by less, because more people came out and voted for him. More people were excited about him, and every vote counts. In the end, on the map, it doesn't matter if it's red or blue, as long as the overall number is higher than the one in the other guy's column. And so I want to make sure we're doing that outreach in some of these counties that may not have a majority Democrat turnout on election day. The last thing I'd say when it comes to the hope to give everyone, you all may or may not have seen this, but in the primary vote, there's already an enthusiasm gap. Despite, as I said, about a 50-50 slight Republican registration advantage, 3,000 more Democrats came out than Republicans, which amounted to about 5% of the vote already. 5%, we get there, and this is almost already in our favor if we're up 5. Cook has this as R plus 7, but I think there's a way that that's a soft number. But just saying, like, there's also the issue of just making sure we turn out. And we've seen time and again that when Trump's on the ballot, some of his most devoted supporters just don't show up. And I think we're already seeing that in those primary numbers.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is I just think we have the Democrats, which are obviously in our corner, a lot of independents. By looking at the numbers in the polls, there's like a 70, or I might even be up to 80% disapproval by independents of the job that Trump is doing. So that looks like a pretty good get there, a good percentage of those. There are probably some Republicans who could come across. And those that are, you know, entrenched and stuck in their boots and, you know, stuck in for Trump, they may say, you know what, I can't come out and vote. You know, there just might be a lot of no-shows. Again, we can't count on that, but you can almost kind of see that if you're demoralized, you're not going to, you know, take the time and make the effort to go out to the polls and vote for somebody that you really just, you know, is leaving a bad taste in your mouth while you're doing it. So hopefully that's a good sign for us. And other themes that we're hearing across the state, one more node in a microcosm, we just keep hearing, we're knocking on doors. Somebody's like, oh my gosh, Democrats. I didn't know there were Democrats in my neighborhood, and we're getting less and less than that because we're getting out. So now on a macro level, when you go out and see, you know, in rural areas and a Democrat's out there seeing people and they say, hey, a Democrat showed up, I've been wanting to see someone and talk to someone, I think that's going to have a great response.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because on doors in some of these counties, they'll be like, oh, there are no other Democrats here.
Right.
And in the primary, I could obviously only have Democrats vote for me. And I just show them the map on NGP or minivan. And, you know, I'm like, look, all these people are registered Democrats. And every time they're like, oh, my God, I thought I was the only one. And so I think there's also that sense of, even in the reddest of the red counties, you're going to have 30% of people voting Democratic. And sure, they may be the minority, but that's still a heck of a lot of people. And so you're absolutely right. It's about making sure they know that there is a community of folks who share their values.
Yeah, it's a lot of people when a certain percentage of, the other side may not even vote, may not even come out. So that adds strength. And we've also been hearing from a lot of people, they just are demanding, of course, because of all the corruption, everything that's going on, but just in general, even at the state legislative level, more transparency, more accountability. We're seeing this corruption. How do you speak about the transparency, the communication, how do you put yourself out there to say, look, you'll be hearing from me, you'll know what's going on, what are some of your plans around that or some of your ideas around that?
Yeah, I mean, look, as a former corruption prosecutor, this is very, very close to my heart. And, a big part of the case that I'm making to voters, which is first, as you hit, and as we discussed, I mean, the corruption coming out of the administration is staggering and almost
Hmm.
beyond belief, and more befitting some sort of third world corrupt government rather than
Right.
a 250-year-old democracy that I firmly believe is and can continue to be the greatest country in the world if we get our act together. But, I think so the first thing we have to do is make sure that we are exposing and putting sunlight on some of this and truly understanding where the money is going and where it's coming from. And, I get asked, well, what if you flip the House and not the Senate? What are you going to do? You can issue subpoenas in the House without any approval from any other, either from the Senate or from the White House. I've issued a lot of subpoenas in my day as a prosecutor, and I think they're an enormously important investigative tool. And that's something I definitely want to do to try to figure it out and make sure that we're operating off of a full amount of facts before we decide how to hold folks accountable. But the other thing I always like to follow up with is Congress hasn't been doing a good job holding themselves accountable for a long time. That's why their approval rating is lower than the IRS. They're, they're like 10%, I
Ouch.
think. It's bad. It's bad. And,
This
well,
Congress isn't doing anything. It's like the most benign. They're just not getting anything
Ugh.
passed.
no, exactly. Not only are they not doing anything, Natalie, but when they are doing things, it's to protect themselves and enrich themselves. So, for example, the fact that members of Congress can still trade individual stocks based on information they have that we don't is insane. And the fact that they're
Mhm.
ever allowed to be lobbyists, I think, is insane. You look at what happened with both Democrats and Republicans getting rich after they got into office, or you look at some of the misconduct that they've been found to be committing, like Eric Swalwell, a Democrat, or Tony Gonzalez, a Republican. It's pretty
Right.
clear Congress was kind of protecting its own until it started becoming politically untenable. That sort of stuff is offensive to me. And I think that's one of the reasons that people have lost such faith in Congress. We're going to be rolling out an anti corruption platform very soon because this is a matter that's very important to me. So stay tuned. We're in the midst of planning it and hopefully doing a media availability and all that. And I think it's important for two reasons. One, because I think corruption is one of the defining issues of our time because we've got people getting richer off of our backs while we can't fill up our gas tanks, while we can't afford groceries on the 4th of July. And then second, because the big reason it's happening is because of career politicians. And my opponent, Ralph Alvarado, has been on the ballot 6 times. He's taken votes to benefit himself and his financial interests. He has backed Matt Bevin, the former governor, who is clearly corrupt and currently a fugitive from justice.
Right.
And, he also abandoned us to go to Tennessee because he thought he had a better job there. He's exactly the sort of profile of a self-serving politician that got us into this problem. And so I want to make sure that the people of Kentucky know the contrast between a former corruption prosecutor and a self-serving career politician.
I think
Yeah,
you'll
I
get that
mean,
message across.
yeah.
Here's open.
Especially being a prosecutor, I love that, and then really taking that whole corruption head on. I think it resonates with a lot of people. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the national, though. I got one question for you. What are some of the unique issues that Kentucky has facing them? This may be overlooked in the national politics, and obviously you'll be at a federal level, but you're also representing those in Kentucky. So, something that's kind of getting overlooked that you're able to shine a light on.
I mean, first, I think there's a lot of ignorance about Kentucky and frankly, other rural states. I was really lucky to go to Stanford for undergrad, and I was surrounded by people much smarter and more worldly than me. But while they were all going off to fancy vacations in, Laos or wherever, and knew all these other countries, the amount of ignorance that folks had about the states between the Pacific time zone and the Eastern Seaboard was staggering. And I think there's still a lot of that in DC. That's part of the reason why I'm having to educate folks about why this is such a winnable district, because they just look at it, they look at the presidential number, and they don't bother to look at Governor Beshear's numbers. They don't bother to look at the Amendment 2 numbers from either the anti-abortion amendment that was resoundingly defeated in this district, or the attempt to send public dollars to private schools that was also resoundingly defeated in this district. And so part of it is just making sure they understand we have such a unique political history here, as I'm sure you guys appreciate and know yourselves. We're very independent thinkers. Genuinely, when people say they don't always vote party line or they don't vote the party, they vote the person, we've seen that in so many ways, sometimes to the benefit of Democrats and sometimes to the detriment. But the point is, we're really a very special and unique state. And I think people just don't appreciate that the combination of the rural, suburban, and urban areas in this state, and the long, long history of independent thinking that frankly goes back to when we first were created in 1792, breaking away from Virginia.
Well, you have a public service background. I saw on your website and your biography that you were a program member of Teach for America early on, and then you opted for public service in Department of Justice versus private practice, which could be a lot more lucrative. I think in your campaign, you could stress that public service, and how do you feel that benefits you, and what do you want constituents, potential voters to take away from that message?
No, I really appreciate that, Brian. And my wife likes to joke that I'm allergic to earning my supposed earning potential. But, when I graduated from Stanford, people were getting jobs in big tech because it was booming.
I bet.
It was booming then, even humanities majors like myself. And when I told them I was moving to the Mississippi Delta and making $27,000 a year, you can imagine some people really had some questions. And I mean, similarly, as you said, when I graduated law school and people were going to New York and Chicago and whatever, and I was going to Norfolk, Virginia. Anyway, hopefully it resonates with folks to know that I've never been in this for myself. I'm lucky, like we're fine. We're able to get by, we're able to own our home thanks to a VA loan, and, we're able to make my wife's student loan payments. And I thankfully just finished my student loan payments, but we're definitely not in this to be getting rich. And I don't think any public servant should have that as their goal. So I hope you're right, Brian, that message comes out and that it resonates.
Yeah. That's great.
Well, we got to learn a little bit about your platform and a little bit about you. But before we let you go, we do like to do a lightning round with all of our guests, if you'd be up for that.
Of course. Yeah.
5 quick questions. Just to get to know you a little bit better. All right. You've been a teacher, as we talked about, a JAG officer, and a federal prosecutor. Which one of those was most challenging?
Oh, that is the easiest question. And I think if you talk to any teacher, they'll agree with me. 100% teaching. It was the hardest, most rewarding, but most exhausting job. It's, as I said, I haven't been able to hold a job. I've had a lot of jobs. It is the only one I still dream about. Sometimes I have nightmares about a particular fourth period that I couldn't get under control. But I think that just speaks to how emotionally rewarding, involving, and taxing it was. So 100% being a teacher, that's why I will always, always be fighting for teachers. Was honored to get the National Education Association endorsement. I'm going to be fighting for teachers and student outcomes because, I lived it, and my goodness, it was so hard.
You feel their pain, right?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Already, we talked a little bit about you being on the campaign trail and canvassing. If your dogs Sugar and cats Dirks and Chester were out canvassing for you, this is a little out of the box, but what would be their best endorsement of you?
Well, we are huge pet people, so both I and my wife are very grateful for the recognition of Sugar, Dirks, and Chester, without whom all of this couldn't be happening. I'm quite sure that Sugar's biggest endorsement would be, and I am not a morning person, or frankly, I really like my sleep, which is a problem with this campaign. But I will wake up any hour and let her out, and I never once get angry about it. And I think it's just because she is such a wonderful dog that I don't mind. But she will wake me up any hour. She comes up and just paws on the bed. So hopefully she'd appreciate that. Dirks and Chester, I'd say, they also get a lot of affection, a lot of attention. When you rescue animals, and all three of these are rescues, you obviously have no idea what they've been through. And they're just like, and I know everyone feels this way, but it's genuinely the case, the best, sweetest, like most perfect pets. And we're just so lucky to have them. So hopefully they feel that way. And that's what they'd say if they're on doors. Sugar has actually been on doors with me. And mostly the issue is she is very friendly and sometimes gets in the way of my shtick as she's trying to say hello to everyone. But she's a much better salesperson for the campaign than me.
That's fantastic. Yes. So they would say you're loyal and devoted, right?
That's a much more succinct way. I probably should be keeping in mind the lightning round. Yes, exactly.
No, I love it. I love it. The animals are, we're a big fan of people's pets on this one.
Yeah.
So what's one small thing that always makes your day better?
I don't know that it would be a small thing, but coming home and being with my wife and the pets, like they all want to be in the same room with us. And so sometimes, to come back and my wife will be taking a nap and all of them will be taking a nap, and it's just so peaceful and rewarding. It's hard not to take a nap myself, but that's something that always resets me and grounds me, because in the end, that's what really matters is, the people you love and your family. So that's probably what always makes my day better, and I'm lucky to get a lot of that.
And there's nothing better than pet snugs.
Yep.
I mean, that is for sure.
Oh yeah, there's no shortage in my household. Whether you want it or not, if I were home, for sure, the cats would be all over me, the dog would be all over me. So yeah, no shortage.
Sweet.
Well, as a ninth generation Kentuckian, what do you think is most iconic about Kentucky?
I think it's got to be the natural beauty in the land. I mean, that is what made Kentucky special from the beginning when it came to farming, but also when it came to the natural beauty. Whether it's the gorge, whether it's Cumberland Falls and Cumberland Gap, whether it's, the lakes out west or Mammoth Cave. I mean, it's truly such a gorgeous state. And then, even here in the Central Bluegrass, the rolling hills, it's hard to be. That's another thing, I guess, that makes my day better. When I'm driving out here, it's just such a gorgeous area. So whatever place I'm coming from, when I get out there and I'm able to see some of those horse farms or, tobacco farms, which there are still a few of, or wheat and corn, it's hard not to be in awe of this beautiful place that we live in.
I spent many college weekends in the gorge, going in on a Friday, coming out on a Sunday, and it really inspired my love for our national parks. And it's just a treasure that we have in Kentucky. So I'm with you on that.
So diverse, such a diverse state. It's wonderful.
All righty. And lastly, it's hard being on the campaign trail. And that being said, through this campaign, if you had like a wish, or if you could have one of these two things granted to you, would it be a personal chef or a personal driver?
So I'm kind of a control freak, as any of my staff can tell you about driving. And so I probably get stressed about that, but I also like cooking for myself and my wife. I think what I would like would be if there's someone who could do call time for me when it came to fundraising, political calls. I spend, as you would imagine, so much of my time on the phone. That person would be worth their weight in gold. And also it would help the campaign. But I'd say that would probably be what I would want the most.
That I didn't even think about that. If we could have like a fairy call time person, that would be fantastic. It is hard. I don't think people know how hard it is for, for people on the campaign trail and candidates. It's just constant. But that's part of it, right?
It is. It's terrible, and it should not be the way it is. And I'm not saying because it's hard for me. I'm saying because this campaign finance system is so messed up, and we should not be only allowing candidates who have the most money to succeed. But look, that's how it is, and those are the rules. And look, we've been lucky that we've had a lot of fundraising success, and I intend for it to continue. But I'm hoping that we use that success to make it better. And so that we're not doing so much of that, not because, again, I'm worried about my everyday life. This is meant to be a sacrifice, but instead so that we don't make it so that only the very rich are able to either self-finance, or candidates like me who aren't rich have to spend all their time fundraising as opposed to focusing on policy and talking to everyday voters.
It's huge.
Yeah, we should do whatever we can to enable true representation. Yeah, we didn't even get on the campaign financing Citizens United, which is always one of our favorite topics. But we'll have to save that for later on as we get closer to the campaign and have you back when we do a progress check on how you're doing.
I'd love to. It'd be an honor to come back.
Yeah, that'd be great. So, Zach, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, we really appreciate it. And how can everyone learn more about your campaign and get involved?
Yeah, thanks. So the website is easy. It's zachdembo.com. Please feel free. On there, there's links to volunteer, links to donate. Our press releases are there. We're also on all major social media, so feel free to follow or like any of our pages, and feel free to reach out. There's a way to reach out to the campaign on the website, and it's easy to just email info@zachdembo.com. But I'm just one guy. I didn't get into this because I wanted my face everywhere and my name everywhere. I wanted to get into this because I wanted real change. I know there are a lot of folks in Kentucky and elsewhere who feel that way, whether they're in the district or not. And we need every single one of y'all in order to do this, because we really, really can win it. But it's not going to be based on my actions alone. It's going to be based on how much of a team we have. So would be honored for anyone who's willing to join the team to check us out on any of those sites.
Yeah, thanks so much. I just want to put a shout out to your website. And as we found with many or most Democratic candidates versus, the Republican opponents, your website is rich with information, policy, your stances and ideas. And, so which makes it great when you're out campaigning. You can say, check out my website for more information. There's actually information out there versus, so we say, your opponent, which says, hi, I'm this guy. I'll follow whatever Donald Trump tells me to do. Okay. The end. So I recommend everyone out there, go check out your website. You've got some really great content out there. And again, we appreciate you joining us.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Natalie. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and hope to talk to y'all again soon. And let's flip this district.
Heck yeah.
That's right.
Thanks so much. That's it for this candidate interview. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming podcasts or exclusive material. And don't forget, you can join the conversation at our Facebook and Instagram pages or at bluedotpodcast.com. Until next time, stay curious, keep the facts in focus, and never stop fighting for what matters. Peace out, everybody.